You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskens, your host. As always, we're going to continue the conversation around apartments and the delivery of built form in this state by bringing Scott Cameron, General Manager at Finbar, back in the room. Mate, you're at the top of the pole in Perth's most prolific apartment development firm these days. I would have thought that if anyone has the answers as to what's exactly going on the ground right now, what's working and what's not, what's finishing, what's starting, what the price points are, where things need to get, and what could be done to fix the issues we have in this market right now, it would be you, mate. Thanks for coming back into the studio after about a year.
Thank you, Trent. Appreciate it.
Hey, we caught up just recently at a property council event called Yes in My Backyard. You had a bit of a chat on the panel talking about some of your experiences recently in terms of the culture in Western Australia, both from neighbours and the planning system. And I thought it was really insightful, really starting to look at how we are failing as a state in meeting those infill targets we set ourselves about 10 years ago. And more critically, the fact that we're going in the opposite direction these days. We've really come off, haven't we?
I think if anything, it's when you're having the conversations in the community, and in Floreat as a very good example, is that people, I do not think, understand the wider issues. And you see these usual tropes of arguments that come out, and you hear people saying, oh, I'm not against development. I just want sensible development. As if having built form development in your suburb is not sensible. It is actually being supported by the local planning scheme already. And yet because people, they're afraid of change and they're afraid of those sorts of large-scale changes, they're going to see very large changes if Apple is successful in getting their planning scheme changes approved.
Well, you're talking directly about the development at the Boulevard in Floreat. You're a resident in that area as well. And I guess it's quite topical that you bring that up straight away at the top of the podcast. It's probably one of those early engagement situations where a developer's sitting on a big site, a current shopping centre, that really needs a renovation at the very least, water dripping from the ceiling in winter, but has the opportunity to certainly add some critical mass of urban infill to an area that is typically an R10, R20 area with no opportunities for downsizers, no opportunities for the lower income workers that work in the suburb, like teachers, for example, to have somewhere to call their own at an affordable space in an area that really wouldn't be bothering anyone. You think about putting a couple of towers at the Boulevard. That's a perfect case study, I think, that you're kicking the conversation off with, where a large-scale developer that's got the money, got the intent, got the patience to get this thing up, straight away at the initial engagement stage is being hit by the locals.
When it comes to the fact that if you're going to have density in a suburb, and when people are saying, oh no, I bought into a green suburb, and so I expect it to remain a green suburb, and that they want the deep verges, they want all the trees on their verges in their front yards. Well, if you think about it then, the best place to have your density is in and around the shopping centre.
And as a substitute for turning all of your blocks into a house behind a house zoning as well. When you think about the blank canvas that a place like the town of Cambridge is, especially in areas like Floreat, where pretty much no property in that suburb is subdividable currently, your next stage is to trickle this along one step at a time and turn all the properties into house behind a house properties. And therefore, that's where you really lose your trees on your verge in your backyard for driveways and new roof space. Or you hit this straight away, get all that density done in a couple of towers in the activity centre, and at the same time get an injection of investment into a renewed activity centre, renewed shopping centre to support everyone else in the suburb. Wouldn't that be the argument that a YIMBY would give, that someone who's thinking quite pragmatically about the future of their suburb, if they accept density as the solution in the future, which I think is the big issue here, that there just is no acceptance of it at all in some areas, that would be the solution to keeping the green canopy in a suburb?
These things are not happening in isolation. It doesn't sort of just land in everyone's lap and it's like, oh, suddenly you're saying you want density here? The density was actually being considered years ago when the scheme was being amended in a broad sense, and they looked at these different activity centres, and Floreat Forum was identified as a site for density. As part of the discussions around that, the reports were looking at, well, is there affordable housing in this suburb? And it was saying you don't have affordable housing in Floreat. And so if you don't have sufficient affordable housing, well, that means all those key workers, whether it's teachers, nurses, whether it's service workers,
the next generation of kids,
they're now going to have to live elsewhere. And you look at that and sort of think, well, is that the kind of society we want to live in, where we're saying, hey, look, you can move into a suburb and you have an as-of right to say it shouldn't change, this is how it should always be, and yet you have your very large house and a very large block with a tree out the front. I struggle with that. Now, of course, I'm a developer, but I also lived in Sydney for 10 years and I saw how, a large city deals with density over there. It is, I think, an effective way to have a much more interesting city, to have those areas of density, so that if there is this activity centre, a bit like Karrinyup, which has a shopping centre, a myriad of shops there, as well as it's starting now to get, the Blackburn developments out there. If you could have something similar at Floreat, that would be, I would have thought, a massive bonus, not just for these people who at the moment are against density, but in 30 years' time, they may be looking for a property to right size into, to go from the 1,000 square metre block to find, a nice apartment with views of the ocean, views back to the city.
I view this as long as you accept that densification in your area is a reality, which is a hurdle we need to get past with society first, and that is the way that we have to go if we're going to stop urban expansion in Western Australia. It is the norm for most cities around the world, given they'd already stopped urban expansion decades ago in most places. Then from there, it's very much a pragmatic argument. If you are all about protecting the trees, all about protecting the streetscapes, all about protecting the suburban streets in your suburb, then the way to do that is to massively densify your activity centres, which is protecting the suburban streets where everyone else lives. That is the only solution. Otherwise, the state government will eventually force the local government into a broad-based R60 level rezoning of the suburbs, and you get townhouses everywhere. And that's essentially what's happened in the city of Nedlands. They were screaming black and blue about not wanting any densification in the area. They hadn't had a revision to their local planning scheme for 25 years. So Rita Saffioti came in and said, well, if you're not going to do it, I'll do it. Bang, here you go. Everywhere between Stirling Highway and the next street block, for example, Ibby Jenkins, south of the highway, that's all going to be R60 now. So now there's this huge banding of R60, a little bit of RAC0 on the highway, and everyone else stays there. If they had their time again, they probably would have accepted much higher density in certain pockets around Broadway, around Aldi, around Woolworths, these areas that are going to be coming in, if it could have protected the character of the rest of those streets. And unfortunately, this is what's happening. You look at places, for example, more suburban areas like a Morley, like a Balga, Nollamara, Westminster, Willagee, all these areas that there hasn't been a lot of NIMBYism in these areas, but these areas do now have a character of really every second house being at least a house behind a house. 30, 40 years ago, there was some proactivity about creating that activity centre, that town centre in Morley, for example, or the Galleria, as broad-based as it is, similar to the Boulevard, would have apartment buildings on there, and maybe there'd be areas that wouldn't have as much subdivision going on at a small-scale, low-density level. So it is going to be something I think is going to come back and bite suburbs in the butt in the future, where highly densified activity centres protecting the suburban streets in a suburb will probably be the preference if possible. But right now it's that pushback, that friction that's continually creating that incremental subdivision and densification that is going to be an issue for people in the future, because you can't pull back a house behind a house. When it's done, it's done. The value is too high. Mate, let's move on to where you're at in the market right now. Some exciting news, and you can see it if you come off the freeway at Mill Point Road. You nearly finished Civic Heart. How exciting, hey?
Oh, this is huge for us and huge for the city of South Perth as well. And here is where, if you think about density in a positive way, this is a development that epitomises all of the benefits that come. Like, there's 309 apartments, ranging from 1 beds through to very large 3 beds, and 25 ground floor commercials that will double the retail space in that area of South Perth.
Have you had a lot of uptake, interest in people leasing that out or buying that?
We've sold all but 2 of the ground floor commercials.
What would characterise what businesses are going in there?
We're still waiting to see what all the fit outs are, but we're seeing a number of small cafes and F&B offerings. And of course, if people have been in the area, they will have seen that the station opened. That was the former Heritage Police Station. And that was taken on by Ross and Drew, who are behind...
Ross was on the podcast a year or so ago.
Yeah. And they're behind some of the best F&B operations around town, like the old synagogue in Fremantle, the Beaufort and Mount Lawley. And of course, they're having a crack at Yagan Square, and I wish them all the best with that. Hopefully it'll work well. And they've opened up this amazing F&B at the station.
I drove past last week. It was busy. It was full already, and the apartment building hasn't even finished yet.
And that's a wonderful thing, as suddenly there's an attractor, right? So suddenly there's people, a lot of activation, and that is just from 1 ground floor tenancy
You've created a new activity centre, a town centre this building is going to be, isn't it? It's fantastic. So you've got 309 apartments all in all. How many do you have left to sell?
We've only got 62 left for sell. So we've sold.
So if anyone's interested, they can give you a buzz.
Yeah, they certainly can. There's still some 2 beds left. They start from about 980, and the 3 beds start from 1.55 mil.
I assume that when you were first selling some of these apartments, they were a bit cheaper.
This is one of those projects where we entered the market within 6 months of COVID occurring. And so this was a litmus test to us as to really testing the market and seeing if apartment living, if there's still an appetite for it. And there was. And we had a really positive reaction to it. And we commenced construction. We didn't wait for the standard number of pre-sales. We had just over 60 sold, and we saw good reaction across all the different apartment types.
And you could do that because of your funding model. You had a bit of money behind you.
We're ASX listed and very careful with our cash flows, and we've got JV partners who also, they're very careful with their equity, and they were able to put some in. We put in some additional equity, and that meant we could begin construction substantially sooner than one normally would. But that was our saving grace, because here was a project where it occurred in that perfect window as we saw construction costs leap 35 to 40%. And we have a relationship builder, Hanson, but we were able to see what was occurring with these construction costs almost on a live footing. And so we were able to adjust our pricing accordingly as we were going. And that has meant that this is a successful project in what would otherwise have been a very constrained market. And so, here we are now. We've got 62 left, and we're expecting settlements to occur prior 30 June.
So we're really close. I mean, if you drive past, you would expect that these things are getting very close to being done. So within the next month or so, people are going to be able to start moving in.
Well, that's the plan, and we've just put in the finishing touches. Actually, the Main Street Tower is completely done. That's been done for quite some time. If people don't know, we've got 2 towers. The Main Street Tower is 21 stories tall, and the Mill Point Tower is 37 stories tall. But yeah, the Main Street Tower has been complete for a bit of time now, and yeah, we're just finishing off on the last few floors and the sky deck up on level 37, it's phenomenal.
Do you have to be a homeowner to get up there?
You have to be a homeowner to get up there, but you could own a 1-bedroom in the podium. You can still go up to level 37. And it is going to be one of the most amazing roof decks in our city. You've got 2.5 to 3-story glass around you that protects you, but it's open above you, and you're looking north to the city and, of course, across to Rottnest if you want to.
Some of the best views in the country, I would have thought.
Some of the best views, and it is simply extraordinary. There will be a lot of happy new residents moving in very soon.
Very exciting. So that's really good news, Scott, and congratulations to you and Finbar for being able to get this thing through over the last few years through COVID. And you've got hundreds of people working on this at the moment, just finishing it off. So the effort's monumental. The cost obviously would have been significant, and it nearly turns out to be a public service, because everyone else who hasn't purchased a property here still gets to benefit from all the activity centre that has been created and will do for generations to come. So congratulations.
And let's not forget the wider benefits to the reduced infrastructure costs. So instead of having, your greenfield lot that's going to have to get serviced for all the additional, roads, schools, hospitals, if you're doing this infill development, what you're doing is you're leveraging all the existing infrastructure you have.
Well, you said we've got 309 apartments. 309 dwellings in an urban expansion setting would have taken 20 hectares to develop on. How many hectares did you develop on?
It's 8,000 square metres.
0.8 hectares. There you go. So I think that's a perfect example for everyone out there in the NIMBY space who is worried about cutting trees down. Well, Scott's just found a site that didn't have many trees on it in the first place that's using less than a 20th of the land to be able to put the same amount of people on in a much higher amenity area. So you come at me with conversations about cutting down trees and how apartments are a problem, you're going to lose that argument very quickly, I would have thought.
Well, at Civic, we're planting approximately 200 trees. So, do the math.
So it's a net positive.
A net positive, and we've got these amazing green walls there above the main lobby entrance. There's an FNB lane that goes behind the Heritage Post Office, which most people might know in the corner of Mill Point and Men Street. If you look at this building, it so positively engages with its surround. What we've done is we've extended Men Street, and if people know it, it has these beautiful plane trees that go from where the ferries are all the way up. Well, we've extended that another city block.
Very cool.
People should go down there now and check it out, because it is something else.
You've got a couple other projects you're finishing up in 2024. Tell us about them.
We have Aurora. That's our second stage Applecross project. This is on Kintow Road, and this is going to be completing in probably end of September. Again, great project, 118 apartments, and we've sold just over half of those.
Were you expecting to sell more? Have you lifted prices? Has that been an issue? Where are you at with regards to the litmus test on this being a successful project?
This is the fascinating thing between even just a different area between South Perth and Applecross. South Perth, we have seen investor activity in Civic Heart. In Aurora, it is predominantly owner-occupier and a strong demographic. Those people, they like to touch it, they like to feel it, they want to stand on their balcony and go, okay, this is my view. And then they're willing to buy. And that's why I think for those sorts of projects and these sorts of infill areas, predominantly owner-occupier, you've got to get building, you've got to get constructing. And then once you're there, people will come to it, they can see it, they can see, okay, you've started construction, and now they're going, all right, we can see you're almost there. And then people start going, okay, I'm going to put my house on the market, I'm making the change.
It's a great example there for the argument that Emily Young and Luke Parker have put forward in the last couple of weeks about the state government assisting with guaranteeing developers being able to move forward with finance before they get their nominal pre-sales that the banks need, right? Obviously, you guys aren't in that position generally because you have a great cash position, but most developers would have to wait months and months and months to pre-sell 50-60% of their apartments. And as you just said, a lot of people in Western Australia these days, especially if they're downsizers and especially if they've seen a lot of the issues that some apartment developments have had in Perth, in Sydney around quality and defects, they're really gun shy and they want to see buildings get out of the ground, and to some extent they want to stand on their balcony, as you said, before they put their pen to paper. That makes it really hard to put the cart before the horse in this terms, isn't it?
And when you consider those difficulties, and now we're talking about the industry, I can see some merit in it. Obviously, for Finbar, it's not as critical.
You're one company, right? You can't fix everything.
And if you look at the amount of apartment product that is being put into the marketplace, it's not very much. We're at such a low scale here. We had issues even before COVID, because we have such a lower industrial base, a lower amount of skilled labour, even before COVID. And now here we are post-COVID, and everyone is fighting over skilled labour, whether it's across this country or around the world. All these conditions are being felt, no matter if you're in Europe, if you're on the east coast of Australia, or if you're here in WA. We have to stand up and try and attract people to come here.
The irony is we're not actually competing for labour. We should be competing for labour, but we're not. We have these ridiculous skilled migration caps that mean we're actually not even bothering competing for the labour we need. And that is actually the problem right now. I assume with the projects you've got, Civic Heart, Sabina and Burswood on the point there, that's a lot of labour that just one company needs in Western Australia right now. How's it been in terms of delivering these projects?
We're obviously fortunate to have our relationship builder Hanson, but even Hanson has issues in terms of skilled labour and the amount of skilled labour that is available. And as everyone knows, when you're doing these built form projects, it is all about how you're scheduling your trades through a project. You can't just run a trade through and wait and then let the next trade go through. These are all happening back to back and progressing the way through the project. So if you're finding it hard to get certain skilled trades, and this could be anywhere from, is it cabinet makers, is it tilers, plasterers? These are important trades within built form. It is difficult because there's just not a huge amount of these skilled trades around. And then, of course, we're competing against greenfield developments, the detached housing market.
State government infrastructure projects.
State government infrastructure projects where,
the mining industry.
And the mining industry. And they are often paying quite large salaries to people. And that I understand, I get it, it's attractive. But we need to have a sustainable construction industry in WA. Otherwise, we are currently failing.
The market has failed, hasn't it, Scott?
100% failed. We keep on talking about a housing crisis, and maybe that's part of the problem, is that because we keep on saying it, people are just getting used to it. We have a huge issue with homelessness. We've got a huge issue with people who are not in the housing that they need. And we know that this has huge effects psychologically and socially across our communities. And look, I know government is difficult. I don't envy them, and they're juggling lots of balls, and there's so many different policies across so many different areas they have to manage. But housing is one of those basic needs, and it just seems that we have to be doing better if we want to be helping those people who are trying to find good, affordable housing in our city.
You've got 3 projects you're finishing off this year. We just mentioned them, and they're all going to be fantastic projects for the community, for the people who want to be living in them. There's obviously a handful of other projects around Perth being finished off by colleagues in the industry. You've just started Garden Towers in East Perth. If you drive past, you can see you're pretty much breaking ground there. How's that been going in terms of making that stack up with the construction prices the way they've gone over the last few years and the sales prices you now have to sell your apartments for in that area?
So Garden Towers has been a litmus test for us, because if you look at Civic, Aurora and The Point out in Rivervale, those are projects that we commenced when the construction costs hadn't ballooned up.
They're legacy projects.
They were in the market and they were starting construction, and then the world changed again. Garden Towers is one that we obviously were much more aware of what was occurring, and so that has allowed us, again, we've been able to recalibrate, and pricing has had to address the construction cost increases. We've seen, since we launched to market, we've sold over 63% of that project, and that has seen a very good response. What's been fascinating is that even though we've only just started construction, during our marketing period, we have been increasing prices because we've had to. Over the 12 to 18 months we've been in the marketplace, you've seen construction cost inflation still ticking up. And that
so you're chasing your tail in a way.
You're chasing your tail. And we're hoping, and I think everyone is looking to the future and hoping that we're going to see, I will just say, some stability in the construction pricing. But no one knows for sure. When I look into the future, I still cannot see an event or a policy that is going to change things in a market way. And that's why I think we're not seeing many developers begin other projects across the industry, because there's so much risk and people are being very careful, which is understandable.
Garden Towers is one of the only projects I think that will start this year. And obviously, again, you have those competitive advantages, not having to wait for pre-sales, having a bunch of cash, being ASX listed compared to most developers to be able to underpin this. You obviously would have a bunch coming in from Civic Heart finally finishing soon. So that would help prop up your cash flow and those things. You've got a lot of competitive advantages most of your competitors do not have. So I'd say you sit on your own, Finbar, as one of those companies that can get a little bit of this done when most others can't. In terms of the pipeline of apartment development sites that are in the market right now, for example, not including sites you may have purchased years ago, what's the reality for you in terms of your acquisition strategy right now? Are you seeing anything on the ground in your East Perths, West Perths, Subiacos, Western suburbs, or even just broadly across Western Australia, where if you could purchase the site right now, you could make it work?
When you're looking at the current market, there is still a high element of risk if you're looking at any project. If you are going to launch a project, there is, I think, obviously still potential in the western suburbs, because the underlying land value is predominantly going to support higher pricing for your product, and that will underpin addressing those higher construction costs. But I think what it comes back to, if you look at the amount of, and I'm talking industry-wide, if you're looking at the amount of product that is coming online, it's falling. It's going in the wrong direction. Even with our competitive advantages, it's not as if we're rolling forward with a huge number of projects.
Well, that's falling as well. There's no hiding it, Scott. You have 3 mega projects you're finishing that were really committed to before escalation in costs happened. You're not replacing that amount of work at the moment, are you? And that's not to no fault of Finbar. That is just a reality of the market, right?
It all comes down to, if you're operating in the built form space, you have to be very judicious in how you deploy your capital. And you can see that in our history. We've still made a profit every financial year. And that goes to the heart of the fact that we're very careful, and we've been looking at our projects and trying to deliver them in a way that it works in what has become a very changing market. You might remember it used to be, if you look 7-8 years ago, it was predominantly investor, and now it's predominantly owner-occupier. When you look at these construction cost increases, this has completely changed again the environment we're operating in. So that being the case, we have to be diligent with the decisions we make. With the fact that we've just started construction with Garden Towers, it's a vote of confidence that, again, we have another large project. This is even larger than Civic, but we've seen a strong pickup from the market at Queen's Gardens and near the rejuvenated Wacker, and hopefully there will be that future primary school there and close to Optus Stadium. It's these sorts of projects that you can see there is demand, there's need. People want to live in these apartments. And so we can see that demand, but we work within such fundamental constraints within WA that it's not as if you can just cookie cutter or just push out a project after project. You have to be very careful, and you have to take a lot of different factors into consideration in terms of your location and that kind of product that you're going to put out into market.
We look broadly across the market right now. It seems like those tick boxes, that due feasibility, the due diligence, both for the developer, but also obviously for the bank, who is the major partner in most of these developments, the major investor in most of these developments, that's going in the wrong direction.
When you consider, you can see the number of lots, strata lots being created. We are well below our 5-year average, let alone our 10-year average. And so when you see those numbers falling off a cliff, you just look at it and think, well, as an industry, you can see that it is difficult to get our apartment product successfully into the marketplace. I know that government is difficult and they've looked at a range of policies, but I do hope that government takes braver steps in their policy and that they understand if their policy only has a certain level of efficacy and effectiveness in our industry.
It's trimming around the edges, Scott. Let's just be frank, straight up, right? There is a huge meteorite that's coming towards Perth that we've seen for years happening, and all we're doing is shaving little bits off the side. It's still coming towards us. It's not changed the course of the issue in this crisis. Certainly when we think about the policies that have been brought in place, looking at the infrastructure headworks fund that's only really being half used at the moment, even if it was fully utilised by developers, still wouldn't be able to make the biggest difference. And you think about the things that really would be that Bruce Willis missile in the Armageddon, right? The things that would make the biggest change. It has to be things like the foreign buyer surcharge going away. It has to be things like the first home buyer's rate of stamp duty being lifted so that people can afford to buy $600,000 apartments without stamp duty, for example. It has to be lobbying the federal government for a special visa class that has 10,000 skilled migrants coming into Western Australia instead of 10,000 students, for example, so they can actually be a part of the solution. Now, how do they find somewhere to live? Well, they've found somewhere to live because all the tenants that were stuck in the rental market because they can't afford the stamp duty at $600,000 now can move out and become first home buyers in the apartment buildings that are being built. It all makes sense in my head as to the big ticket items here that need to be put in place by the state government. And it just seems so protectionist right now for the current labour industry, the current trade union industry, about increasing their wages every day rather than actually looking at the holistic cost of living issues we have right now and the meteorite that is continually going towards us. We need more supply of skilled labour. We need a much more facilitative tax regime or a duty regime that is not getting in the way of people actually being able to take up apartments in the first place. Otherwise, all we're doing is waiting for apartment prices to rise so that Scott can get on with building the next Garden Towers somewhere at 30% higher sales prices.
But I'd just like to think that government can look at the issues that we're facing instead of just tweaking their policies. They actually take the leap. And I think the Infrastructure Development Fund, to me, that's such an easy one where you can look at it and you can understand that government has budgeted, I think, $40 million for infill projects to support their headworks costs. But at the end of the day, it probably is only going to have about 50% of it at most utilised. So that means you've got $20 million just sitting there, and it's just going to flow back to general revenue after 3 or 4 years.
And then they'll re-announce another policy using that money.
But why wouldn't you just amend that policy and going, okay, we can see the facts and figures, and Treasury now has its housing supply unit. They must be able to see the data. The data, it looks you squarely in the face. So if you do want more housing and if you want more infill housing, then surely you should be using your policies to actually leverage a positive outcome. The Infrastructure Development Fund, again, that's a no-brainer. Foreign buyer surcharge. I still don't understand why we are disincentivizing foreign buyers to come in and purchase homes because they underpin our new developments. It's not this huge wave of buyers, but it's a sufficient number that they do make a difference to help developers get started on their projects. So again, you look at it and think, why, as a government, would I not have a policy that is going to give me more housing? Is just one more apartment going to be better? One point I want to make is, and look, I will support all these different policies that the government has in place, but let's just put it into perspective. When government's there saying, hey, look, we're pulling every lever and we've put 2,100 homes into the market, if you look at that over the length of their government, that reflects, on average, only 300 homes. I get it's tough to deliver, But as an industry, we are trying to deliver. We're trying to respond as best we can in a highly constrained market. In one project, we're delivering the same as the government's delivering in a year.
I think that John Kerry is pulling many levers that he can pull. It's actually different ministers who are not pulling the levers they should. For me, my target is squarely in Minister Saffioti, the Treasurer's space here. She's the one that has a lot to do with first home buyers rate of duty, the foreign buyer surcharge. She's the one that can get these policies fixed as the Treasurer. Roger Cook needs to look at having a conversation about our immigration numbers for skilled labour. He's the one that has the ability to lobby the federal government for a special visa to help us out with these things. John Kerry is pulling many levers. He could pull a lot more, to be frank, but he's pulling as many as he can, having picked up a portfolio that was just absolutely tarnished in the first place. He's doing a great job, I think. It is the Treasurer that needs to really pick up her game in this space. That's where I'm squarely looking at in terms of fixing some of these fiscal problems that are essentially causing housing supply to get more expensive every year.
If government is putting money into this space to try and help out, surely all parties, all stakeholders want that money to be deployed effectively and to make a difference. So when you look at the Infrastructure Development Fund, that's an easy. The industry bodies are saying, hey, look, you need to increase it. Yes, okay, that will help a lot of these smaller projects get up, but you've got to broaden the applicability of these headwork funds to cover more costs. Then it will be a catalyst. And look at all the caps that are there for the stamp duty concessions. It's just like,
what's the point of capping it? What are we achieving?
Why cap it? Why are we saying, we want to support properties up to $650,000? And it's just like, well, surely there should be no difference if whether you get a $2 million apartment, $1 million apartment, or a $500,000 apartment.
Yeah, we're moving people into infill.
It's another dwelling. It's an infill, which is going to give government massive economic benefits over time due to the infrastructure savings.
And with a $2 million apartment, you're probably freeing up another infill site somewhere in the western suburbs.
At least look at it and think you're repurposing a dwelling. Someone's moving from a 4-bedroom house into a 2-bedroom apartment. And then suddenly there's a family that can move into that space. When you look at those sorts of policy measures, you just think the foreign buyer surcharge is another one where I'm still going to be suggesting to you that this is costing the budget. And so why would you have a policy?
It is costing us on stamp duty.
Yeah, it's costing us stamp duty. Why do we have a policy that is net negative, not just on revenue, but also on supporting new housing?
Yeah.
It makes no sense to me.
It's populist to keep it in there for the voters who don't understand this. That's unfortunately why it's tough, I think, politically for Minister Saffioti to repeal the horrible, horrible decision that Ben Wyatt made before her.
But for whatever reason may have instigated these policies.
The reason was Ben Wyatt wanted to fix the budget back in 2017 when there was a deficit, and he thought, we'll save $50 million here by bringing this surcharge in. What it did was actually have us lose about $200 million in stamp duty opportunity costs over the next 5 years. That's why he did it.
And if we can't learn from mistakes and improve and make things better, isn't that what government is there for? I again come to the point. We say it all the time. We are in a housing crisis. We knew it was coming. We're in the midst of it now. I cannot see a light at the end of the tunnel. There was the recent report that came out from the National Housing Affordability Council, and that was trying to make predictions in line with the federal government target of 1.2 million homes over the next 5 or 6 years. All of us have been saying in the industry,
it was never going to happen.
Okay, you've got your aspirational target, but let's talk about the reality of how do we deliver more homes. Let's not talk about 1.2 million. That's just a made-up number.
Yeah.
This report, it's been authored by the people who they're delivering the social and affordable housing through Housing Australia. These are the people who are representing government. And even they are saying, okay, it can assist to have an aspirational target, but there's no way we're meeting this. They're saying we're going to miss it by around 300,000 homes over that period. And you look at it and think, well, okay, so we're in a housing crisis. We've got a policy that says, hey, we're going to try and do 1.2 million. We know that is just a made-up aspirational number. How do you deliver more housing to make sure we don't have a housing crisis in the next 3, 4, 5 years? I cannot see anything that's going to make a change. And you read that report, it says, we're going to be in a huge deficit for the next 3 years. And then in a couple of years after that, we might have a slight positive. Yeah. It then goes on to say that any projections that go more than a couple of years, basically worth nothing. So it's a report that says we have this huge housing crisis. We don't know how to fix it. We've got some policies that are trying to change things. And we think maybe in 5 or 6 years' time, we'll be in a slight net positive. But we should be shouting from the ramparts, as you say, we should be demanding if the federal government has kept the migration numbers this high, this long. It has to be targeted, and we have to look at how we're getting skilled labour here to address it. If we start instigating positive policies now and push those policies as far as we can push them, in the next 3 years, we might go, you know what? We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Right now, there's a tunnel and there is no light.
Scott Cameron, General Manager at Finbar. I think we leave it there. That's straight from the horse's mouth of the most prolific apartment developer in Western Australia for many, many years. There is no light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you very much for coming in and having a conversation, and hopefully we'll get an update from you with some more positive news going forward.
Thank you, Trent. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!